Hey everyone, this is Phil, and today I have a little horror story for you. But don't worry, it has a happy end, so stick around. So the other day I was out in Saitama Shintoshin taking some pictures and a little video comparing the 645 and 6x9 photos in my Bessa RF. So I recently obtained a 645 mask for my Bessa RF, and I was really excited about trying that out and showing you how much of a difference 645 versus 6x9 really makes. So I was out shooting and I got done all I wanted to do. So I did some video, I sent the film off to my lab, and then the next day I got him back and two things happened. So the first thing was I noticed the pictures were not particularly interesting, so I immediately was less excited about the video. And the other thing, the very unfortunate thing, was that some of the frames on the film were completely blown out. So these are hopelessly overexposed, they're completely black on the film, and there's just no saving them. And I had a sticky shutter situation on my Bessa RF before, so I figured it was maybe time to clean the shutter mechanism, maybe get in there and just clean it out and re-loop everything, and then that would solve the problem, hopefully. But I took a very close look at the shutter and I noticed the tips of several of the shutter blades were a little bent, and I took a few test fires and I noticed that on some of the shutter actuations, the tips of the shutter blades would actually dig into each other, and they had really bad grooves in them already from when they clashed together and they dug into each other, and they were just beyond saving. As you know, I'm very attached to my Bessa RF. It's the first film camera that I bought as an adult. It's what got me into shooting film again, and I really enjoy using this camera. So I was, as you can imagine, devastated to see this. And I've shown the pictures to several of my friends, and nobody's ever seen a shutter disintegrating like that. So it was kind of a shocking fault that I'd never expected would happen on this camera. And I had pretty much made peace with the idea that I would have to send it off to a professional and get the shutter replaced or fixed up. Fortunately, the Compur Rapid shutter on this camera was very common, so it's on a lot of old cameras, and the parts are comparatively easy to obtain. But I also remembered that I actually have a second Bessa that has the same shutter mechanism. So I thought that maybe I can just take off the lens and replace the entire shutter mechanism. And I didn't end up doing that because the second shutter that I had actually works far less consistently than the one that was on my Bessa. So I ended up actually disassembling the other shutter and taking out the blades and just replacing the shutter blades. And I haven't really found any good guides on the internet on how to do that, aside from service manuals and other similarly hard to understand ancient texts. So I am going to make a little video for you guys on how I replace that mechanism, and give you a little rundown of how the Compur shutter mechanism in the Bessa is made up, and what you can do to service it. Okay, so we're over at my little workspace area right now, and I've got my replacement Bessa here that I have actually reinstalled the faulty shutter. Okay, so you can hopefully see that when I open this up, the blades, sometimes you can see right now they're not properly closed, and that's because the ends of the edges of the shutter blades are actually heavily damaged, and they're just interlocking, and they're not properly closing right now. So I had to completely replace the shutter blades on this, and these are the faulty blades now in the old shutter. This shutter doesn't work as good as the other one, so I just opted to replace the shutter blades and not replace the entire mechanism. So we'll go over how to remove this from the camera, how to remove the shutter blades, and how to reinstall them. And I'll give you a few tips about the shutter and about the Bessa in general. So let's turn on the second camera here. The Bessa is constructed in a way that the lens is actually screwed onto a shutter mechanism that contains both the shutter blades and also the apertures. So both the shutter and the aperture are inside this ring here that says Compur Rapid, and also has the Folklander logo on it, but my understanding is that this was produced at a third-party manufacturer. So you can actually take this entire assembly off the bellows and of the strut here that extends the bellows. The reason why I'm not using this second Bessa is that some of the mechanism is broken, the bellows is damaged, and I was hoping to fix this up, but it ended up being a good thing that I had this, so I could just take some parts from the shutter mechanism for now and fix my main Bessa. So what we're going to have to do is first we'll close it up. There we go. This is closed. And then we are going to open the back. And if you open the back, you have this metal spool in here. You can see that the lens is held from the back with this ring that has 4 little indents on the sides. And I would actually recommend taking the lens out of the mechanism before removing this ring, because you are going to go in there with a sharp instrument and you don't want to scratch the lens. So what we're going to use for this is a lens wrench. So this is a 2-pronged wrench that you can adjust to any number of width, and you're going to use this for anything that has 2 slits on a ring that you need to turn. So this is very handy when you have to reassemble or disassemble lenses for vintage cameras, or parts like this, like the shutter mechanism in a vintage camera as well. So this comes with several different attachments for the actual lens. I recommend using these little screwdriver shaped, don't focus on my face, come on, okay, screwdriver shaped thingies, because those are less likely to slip and damage your lens. So we are going to remove or loosen these 2 screws up here, and then put in the screwdriver attachments and lock them down. So we'll obviously want to make sure that these are straight, and then we are going to put them on the lens and make sure not to touch the lens or the glass surface of the lens. And we're going to adjust it so it's about the same width. And then we can start turning the lens ring, and you can hopefully see that this is turning the actual lens. and you want to be careful with this. If it's tight, I recommend turning the camera before you turn the lens, because if you're putting a lot of strength into turning the actual wrench, then you're more prone to slip. So make sure to turn the bigger thing first always. So we're just gonna pry this out the rest of the way. And of course, make sure not to touch the lens surface. In this case, it's an uncoated lens, so it's not as critical, but you don't want to touch the lens, especially the rear element is always something that you would rather not touch. Okay, and this is the rear element of this lens. In this case, this is a scope bar lens. So for the actual ring that's holding the shutter mechanism to the main part, or the bellows, and the lens standard in this camera, we are going to use these super sharp needle points, because as you can see, there's not a lot of room between that ring and the bellows, which is at this point of course collapsed. And anything that sticks out to the side is going to be more likely to damage the bellows. So we are going to go in from the side here. To make this a little wider. Yep, that should be good. And then we're just going to turn that ring just as before. And make sure to do this incrementally, I would recommend, because you're going to probably get stuck on the bellows a couple times and you don't want to damage it. And at some point it's going to have to come out from under the bellows, so make sure you're gentle with the bellows so you don't damage it. And then we can just lift off this ring. And then the shutter mechanism is actually already disengaged from the bellows. So as soon as you open up the camera, you will notice that the bellows now comes off the shutter mechanism, and the shutter mechanism is just resting in this little lens standard here. So it's not screwed in there, so make sure not to drop this. So you can actually turn it upside down and then it will just come loose like this. And then we can just take the shutter mechanism completely off the lens standard. And that is when we can put the camera aside. So this is just gonna fold down, and we'll put it aside and reassemble it later. All right, and you can see the front element of the lens is still on the shutter mechanism. I could have probably taken this off right at the start. It would not have affected the rest of the process. So go ahead and take that off. This is also just screwed on. It might be a little tight because these cameras are very old and there's a lot of patina going on inside this mechanism. So it might take a little effort, which is why it's easier to do after you have taken out the shutter mechanism from the camera, but they are just screwed in. So you don't need any special tools or anything. This will just screw off. Make sure, obviously, to not touch the lens and to not drop anything. Okay, there we go. And we will just put this on a safe surface like this little microfiber bag. And this is the entire lens shutter mechanism. So this has the shutter. So when you actuate the shutter, you can see it opens up. And then you can also inspect the aperture mechanism like so. So this is also very cool to see, obviously. But just Make sure not to touch them that much. You don't want to get any grease or residue on the aperture blades as well as the shutter blades, obviously. I would just, if you want to wipe them down with something like lighter fluid, then I think that should be okay. But don't touch them with your bare hands, and make sure not to get any dust or any grit in there, because that will definitely affect them in some way. So we have the shutter mechanism, and if you just want to clean the insides, then you need to remove this faceplate here that has the Voigtlander logo, and this is actually pretty easy to do. You can see this little tiny circle just below the Voigtlander logo. It has two little holes, and two little holes usually means that you can open it with something like this. But this is too big, so for little tiny parts like this, I usually use a pair of very sharp tweezers. In a professional context, people are apparently often sanding down screwdrivers so that they have two little tips that you can use for this. But honestly, for this little thing, this is perfectly sufficient. So we will just put each of the little prongs into one of these holes. And again, it's easier to turn the main part and not the tweezers. And once you turn that, you will notice that it actually has a flat bit on the bottom that helps you to clear the silver ring on the inside that has the threads for the lens. And then you can turn this ring a couple degrees, and then you will find that this ring has 3 cutouts, and these actually have lips on this logo ring as well, that you can just slide into position, and then it will just come right out. So you can see the actual shutter mechanism on the inside now, and if you actuate the shutter, it's actually pretty interesting to see all the parts moving. But as I said, I didn't really figure out which parts of these need to be looped. There's a couple of gears in there and a few pistons that I suspected might need to be looped. But in the end, it was easier for me to just replace the shutter blades. So if you need to get in there, this is how to do it. So we'll just put this ring back on here. And then on the back side, you have 3 screws that actually hold this black back cover in place. So we're going to take a screwdriver, a small precision screwdriver. This is about 2 millimeters, I think. Works best for this, obviously. And we're just going to remove these 3 screws. Once you have loosened these up, this comes off completely. You can again pull this off without anything falling out of place, as long as you have the main part of the shutter mechanism lying flat on the surface like this. Because if not, the shutter blades will fall right off. They are really easy to lift off, and they will fall off if you turn this thing on its head. So here you can see the shutter blades. This is really beautiful to look at, I think, and it's really fascinating to see this. And I always, my first impulse when I have issues with the machine is always to take it apart and see what makes it tick, and it's really fascinating for me to see. So here are the shutter blades, and again, you don't want to touch these with your bare hands. As you can probably tell from the smudges, I have touched these because they're shot anyways. So you can just lift these off, and you can see they're overlapping, so there's definitely an order in which to put them in. in this case, you can see that the bottom one is this one. So you have to start from this one, and then you can lift this one off, and then you can lift the other ones off. And you can see if you will lift one off, the other ones will come off too. So it's pretty easy to remove them. And then I would recommend, if you're not replacing but just cleaning them, just wipe them down again with something like lighter fluid or very pure alcohol that doesn't leave any residue, because these operate in a very tight tolerance and they need to clear each other, and if there's anything in between there, it will definitely affect the way in which these work. So once you have these off and you have them cleaned or replaced or whatever, you need to put them back on, and there's really no trick to this. So I think the base is probably safe to touch. Just make sure not to touch the blade part. Then I would just place them on top here, align the big hole, and then look for the small hole and align them until the small hole goes on that little strut. And you can see this is barely engaging. So this has like 0.5 millimeter of engagement. So it's really easy to pull them back off. So have patience and make sure to not push the previous blade off when you're installing the next one, because that's definitely happened to me. And just go clockwise and install the rest of the blades. And there we go. So all the blades are now back on the mechanism, and all we need to do is put the back cover back on there. The hard part about this is there's two little springs sticking out the side here. So you need to trap these inside the ring first before you slide the rest of the ring on there. And it also has cutouts for all the major protrusions. And there's one protrusion, the cable shutter hole is right here. And it's easiest to just align the cutout for the cable shutter and just angle that in so it traps the springs and aligns with the cable shutter protrusion at the same time. And if you do this enough times, at some point you will get it back on. All right, so you can see the cable shutter hole is aligned, and then none of the two little springs are sticking out. So we're going to be able to hopefully work this on there the rest of the way. Align the insides. There we go. And now it's on. And now we can just replace the back screws. Hold this thing in place. And that's it. That's the shutter mechanism realigned. Everything is back in place, and then you can just proceed to replace the lenses on there and do the rest of the process in reverse to get it back on the camera. Be gentle with the bellows, especially with an original Vogtländer bellows, because these are very old cameras. I would recommend just doing the first few turns by hand, and then again use the lens tool to screw it in fully. And that's it. That's how to replace the shutter mechanism or the shutter blades in a Bessa RF with a Compur Rapid shutter. My Bessa is now working properly again, and I already have the next roll of R.LUM.R 400 in there with the 645 windows open. So I'm hopefully going to be able to shoot some more video and some more shots this weekend, and have a proper 645 versus 6x9 video for you guys around next week or in 2 weeks or so. I've been sticking to a 2-week schedule mostly the past few weeks, and it's been working out pretty well. As you know, I have a full-time job, and it's just a little less pressure if I'm just doing one video in 2 weeks as opposed to a weekly schedule. I know we're supposed to do a weekly video in order to be successful on YouTube, but I'm just going to stick with that 2-week schedule and make sure I actually have something interesting to say to you guys. So thank you for sticking around. I really appreciate everyone who's been watching my videos, and I'm hoping to go out and shoot a little bit more over the weekend and the next coming weeks, and have some more varied content. I know it's been a little gear heavy these past few weeks, but we'll have some more interesting stuff coming very soon, hopefully. If you like this, please remember to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications. And I know this is kind of getting old, but it really helps the channel, so I really appreciate that. And again, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again.